Excellent. Okay, good morning, everybody. We are now live on YouTube, as well as you good selves who are with us on Zoom this morning. So for you people who maybe don't know who I am, my name is Louise Thompson. I am Head of Business Services at TPAS England, and welcome to Scrutiny Week. Day 3 we're on. Really pleased to be doing this session today with yourselves. And between you and me, it's the most popular one. So what can I say? You know, you've picked a good one to come to, hopefully. And this is all about a no-nonsense guide to scrutiny. And they probably picked the best person to deliver this because I'm from Barnsley and I'm from Yorkshire, and we tend to tell it as it is. So I'm all into no-nonsense, really, because I don't really do corporate jargon and corporate gobbledygook. So hopefully today's session will have something for you all, whether you're new to scrutiny, whether you've been doing scrutiny for years, or whether you just think, well, I'm just coming along to find out what this scrutiny lark is all about. You're all welcome, and hopefully today's session will be useful to you all. So I have got slides to share. You were probably expecting that. So I'm going to share my screen with you now, and then I'll take you through in terms of what's happening and what kind of stuff we're going to be covering today. So let me get to the right slide and let's get going. Hopefully people can see that okay. Let me just make it slightly bigger. Lisa, is that working? Are we all good to go? Excellent. Okay. So I'm covering really 4 things today when it comes to scrutiny. I'm going to cover where it's come from, so you know where it's actually originated from when people talk about scrutiny. I'm then going to sort of cover what scrutiny is, and I'm not going to give you the definitions from, you know, the Oxford, you know, sort of list of encyclopedia dictionary or anything like that. I'm going to give you a take of what scrutiny is from my understanding and also listening to people who are involved in scrutiny. So we're going to look at what we actually mean and what it is. And then we're going to look at why do you do it? You know, what's the point of scrutiny? And then finally, and the bit maybe some of you are very interested in, how do you actually go about doing scrutiny? So those are the things that we're going to be looking at this morning. I'm probably going to talk for about an hour, I would have thought, and then open it up for questions and discussion after that. So I hope that's what people were looking for today. The good thing about Zoom is you can disappear and nobody will notice, but hopefully you'll stay with us for the duration of the session today. So let me kick off. Where's scrutiny come from? Well, it's been around for quite a while now, 10 years. I first got involved in scrutiny when I had a different job working for a council, and it was my role to set up scrutiny way back in 2011. So it's really been around for quite a long time. And I guess that maybe tells you that there's something good about it because it stood the test of time as well. So it came in as part of this thing called the Localism Act. Now, some of you may have come across that, may have heard of it, but it came out with a big fanfare when David Cameron was in power, and it was very much, you know, Grant Shapps, if you remember him, he's still kicking about, isn't he? Talking about, you know, how this Localism Act was really going to change how things were done. It was going to give powers back to communities. And part of this was really talking as well about social housing. So what the Localism Act, gave us was the set of regulatory standards for social housing. So it talked about this new framework that was going to come in, and there was going to be a set of standards that were going to really sort of govern how social housing was going to operate. And one of those standards, and again, some of you may already know this, but one of the standards that came in was the tenant involvement and empowerment standard. Now, sometimes people are a little bit surprised that there's actually a standard governing tenant involvement and empowerment, but there is. And again, you can Google that, you can check it out, and you will see that, and it will tell you a little bit about what you can expect from your landlord when it comes to tenant involvement and empowerment. So back to scrutiny then. The actual standard itself, and I've put this up there on the slide, it talks very much about making sure that registered providers, so that's councils and housing associations and ALMOs, making sure that they can give their tenants a wide range of opportunities to influence and be involved in the scrutiny of their landlord's performance and the making of recommendations to their landlord about how performance might be improved. So you can see from that, it's set down very clearly that actually registered providers have to give tenants the opportunity to scrutinise. Now, I think that's really important when it comes to scrutiny, simply because it's not an optional extra that, you know, landlords can maybe choose to do if they fancy it or not do if they don't fancy it. It's actually set there in the framework and the regulatory requirements. So I think it's important to know that, because it does really set, I think, scrutiny on a very robust and firm setting when it comes to engagement. So that's really where the kind of origins of scrutiny are. And people may say, well, it's all well and good, you know, it's saying that, but it doesn't go into detail. And you're right, it doesn't go into any detail about how that scrutiny should be, or, you know, where it should operate, what can you scrutinise. There isn't really any detail in the actual regulatory requirement itself. Now, that was done, they will say, purposely, because they wanted to not be too prescriptive, and they really wanted to offer tenants the opportunity to shape with their landlords how the scrutiny in their particular part of the world was going to take place. So they left it very sort of open. Some people will say vague, but they left it like that for a reason. So tenants and landlords could work together to actually define how that scrutiny function was going to happen. So in terms of where it's come from then, been around since 2011, part of the Localism Act, part of the regulatory framework that's actually active and working and overseen by the regulator for social housing. Okay, so that's the first bit of the puzzle of scrutiny answered, where it's come from. Okay, I'm going to move on then now to talk a little bit about what scrutiny is. Now, again, lots of ideas, lots of definitions about this, but I think it's really important to start looking at it in terms of a practitioner's point of view. So if you're doing scrutiny, what does it mean? What it's about? What is it about? You know, so I'm not talking the theory here. I'm talking really about what is it like and what is it? What do we mean by it when we're actually doing scrutiny itself? So I'm going to take you through some slides on this. And, you know, we can look at this in a little bit more detail as well when we do the question and answer session as well. So if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat or hang on to them until we get to the end of the presentation, and we certainly will pick them up as we go through. Okay, so just in terms of the next slide then, I always think it's important to talk about scrutiny in terms of the bigger picture. I think scrutiny itself has to take this almost helicopter view. It has to take a really sort of big, holistic, if you like, viewpoint on the services, on the business, and look at it from that sort of perspective. So when I work with, you know, whether it's tenants, residents, customers or staff, it's important to recognise really that scrutiny is not really about looking at individual issues or problems. You know, there are other ways, other mechanisms to pick that up, you know, whether it's through the complaints policy or whether it's through some other tenant engagement groups that exist. So scrutiny is never going to be about, oh, you know, Mrs. Brown, she's got a problem with X, Y, and Z, let's scrutinise that. It's never going to be about that, because that's not the scrutiny function. It has to look at the bigger picture. And that's not to say it's not important to recognise individual issues or problems. It absolutely is. But putting that together as part of the bigger picture. And I think that's important to mention, that we have to really keep that in mind when we're doing scrutiny. Particularly if you're a scrutineer, it's not about, you know, a place for you to maybe get some of your issues looked at. It has to be a focus on the bigger picture. And then what it does as a result of that is look for themes or common issues across the business to actually trigger a scrutiny. So it is about looking in that, as I've said, that bigger vision, that looking through that lens across a really sort of wide range of things. So when you are looking at data, maybe satisfaction information that's coming in, or complaints, or maybe it's just that you've heard from several tenants associations, or there's certainly some common issues coming out there where people are mentioning the same thing, or the data's telling you the same thing. So it's about looking for those themes and identifying those themes, because those are the ones that need scrutinizing. It's suggesting that there's a problem across the organization, or an issue that needs to be addressed and needs to be looked at. So that is important when it comes to scrutiny, is having that real sort of peripheral vision where you're looking across the business. It also needs to get to grips in terms of investigating services, policies, but also business plans as well. And that ties into the next one. Scrutiny is about looking at the direction of the business. It's not just about customer services or front-facing services. It's about, what is your provider doing as a business? What is its plans going forward? What has it got in terms of maybe new build? What about its finances? How is it looking maybe around mergers? So the whole direction of the business as well is an important factor that scrutiny should pick up on. So, people sometimes say scrutiny is just really about, those services, that customers take, like repairs. It's maybe about looking at things to do with, grounds maintenance. Yeah, absolutely. Antisocial behaviour. Yeah, all those things, very, very important. But also scrutiny should have an absolute green pass to all areas. There shouldn't be any areas that are off limits. And that includes the business generally, and the direction and the shape of that business going forward. And I think the other thing to think about as well is that scrutiny absolutely needs to be mindful of what's going on in the wider world. Certainly the session I ran yesterday with a group of scrutineers were very concerned about the white paper and what was happening around that charter. Were organisations putting that into practice, or what was happening? So they were looking at, sort of the wider picture around the white paper, and were very concerned about that, and talking about scrutinising that and where organisations were at with it. And I know some of you have looked at welfare benefits as well, and the policy and the legislation around universal credit and how that's affecting things. So scrutiny really does need to be outward looking. It needs to consider what's happening nationally in the housing world, and also maybe what legislation could be coming along to affect the business. So really, scrutiny is absolutely about the bigger picture. It's absolutely about looking at the services that matter to tenants, the plans, the policies of the business, and also looking about the bigger picture in terms of national events and impact, from the political and the legislative world as well. So when we talk about what is scrutiny, I think that slide helps to start putting, I think, some of the jigsaw together. And I hope that helps in terms of, talking about it when we try and explain to people, well, what is it scrutiny is do? What is scrutiny about? It's absolutely about all those things that are on that slide there. Okay, so next slide. I think, again, back to the nuts and bolts of scrutiny. And again, this is supposed to be no nonsense. So we're going no nonsense. Absolutely. Scrutiny is about not accepting what it says on the tin. It's about opening that tin, and it's about getting in there and finding out exactly what is inside. So I've put a nice little visual there, I think, to explain that, because sometimes people ask, well, what's the difference between performance monitoring, or what's the difference between maybe what maybe some of the inspections are doing, or maybe some of the monitoring or review panels are doing? What's the difference? What makes scrutiny different? And I think, again, for me, it's about not accepting what's put in front of you. So it may be that you're looking at performance information, and that's really good to look at. I'm not saying it's not. But actually, I think what we need to do is we need to think about what's beyond that performance information, and think about, well, actually, what is going off on the ground. What are people saying about this? Let's not just rely on the statistics or the data. Let's get out there and talk to people. Let's find out what people are saying about things. So not just accepting it, but really digging deep. You know, people talk about that deep dive, don't they? But this is about scrutiny actually saying, yeah, you're telling us this through this data, through KPIs, through this survey, that survey, but actually we're going to do more than that. We're really going to dig deep. We're really going to investigate, and we're really going to find out what exactly is going on. So I think it's got to be about more than checking stats and data. You know, I'm not saying that's not important, as I've said, it is, but it's got to be more than that. And that's where connecting with the wider tenant base comes in as well. The worst scrutiny I have ever seen in my 10, 12 years of doing scrutiny is those groups that don't look outwards. You know, they're recruited to a panel, they're doing a great job, but they lose touch, they lose connections with the wider tenant base. And it's got to really be said that that is one of the most important functions to do that. It's got to be about looking at what the wider tenant base has to say about the actual services. It's talking to them about some of the things that they think and feel, and actually giving them an avenue into scrutiny. You know, what kind of things, you know, are they feeding back as well directly? And I suppose it brings me to, again, a sort of situation that I came across when I was talking to some of the residents at Grenfell when we did some work there. And it was interesting that they were saying that the actual complaints data that the council were receiving was actually saying that there weren't any complaints. The complaints data was showing that, you know, actually complaints were low and satisfaction was high. And that is because the data itself was being recorded in a way that actually didn't even accept that a complaint was a complaint. It was just logged as an inquiry. But again, if those people on the council had gone out and talked to residents, had actually connected out to those residents, they would have got a different story. So I think, again, the lesson there is actually, yeah, take data into account. But in scrutiny, you've absolutely got to connect with the wider tenant base and find out their views and find out what they have got to say. I think also scrutiny is about having the buy-in of staff. Again, it won't work if staff don't buy into this. I'm a big fan of staff and tenants working together, where tenants, residents, customers, particularly with scrutiny, have the independence to direct it. You know, they're driving the car, they're sort of deciding where it goes, but they absolutely need that support team of staff around them to make it actually go and make it effective. I don't think there's any gains to have, you know, that sort of situation where scrutiny panels set up and staff are either suspicious of it, or they think it's there to threaten them, or they don't see it as something that's a positive asset to their organisation. So staff are critical to the success of scrutiny. And I'd like to think that a lot of staff, and you may know different, support scrutiny because actually it's improving things, it's making things better. And as a member of staff, why wouldn't you want that? So absolutely, scrutiny is about having the buy-in of staff. It's also about having constructive challenges as well. So all of you today will have some great skills when it comes to scrutiny, and I'm sure a lot of you are very constructive in your challenge. So it's about making sure that, you know, you're not an angry axe grinder, you know, you're not there to just find fault or, you know, criticize. Absolutely call out through evidence the things that are wrong, but also giving compliments, you know, saying things are going well, is part of the job of scrutiny as well. So being a constructive challenger. And then on the last point here, it's also the flip side of this as well. Somebody said to me, you know, I left the scrutiny panel because it was like being with a load of nodding donkeys. And I was like, okay, well, tell me more about that. And what it turned out is that the relationship really had become too cozy. It had become that sort of environment where actually the customers, the tenants, the residents were not really challenging. They weren't really asking those questions they should have been asking, or, you know, challenging some of the things they were being told. They were just saying, okay, that's fine. And that is because they had such a great relationship and didn't want to actually have that challenge. And when that happens, scrutiny loses something. So again, it's about making sure that constructive challenge is there and is being maintained. And that's not about being aggressive. It's not about being confrontational. It really is just about asking the questions that need to be asked. And staff members should respect you for that. They should know that that's your actual role to do that. So what is scrutiny? Again, with this particular slide, it's about investigation and it's about challenge. It's about doing that right and having the sort of right attitudes and approaches from both staff and tenants to make it successful. So next time you're faced with some tins of pineapple, don't accept that it's pineapples in the tin. Get that lid open, get in there and find out really what's going off inside and do that deep dive. So that's something to absolutely bear in mind going forward. Okay, next slide. What is scrutiny? Well, it's about making a difference, isn't it? And again, I've said this time and time again, people are probably fed up of hearing me. You may have the most fanciest process of doing scrutiny. You may have, the most loveliest sort of, the flow charts and governance documents and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, if it's not making a difference, it has no point. It's not something that's actually doing anything productive. It's just there to tick a box, basically, if it's not making a difference. So what do I mean by making a difference? Well, again, talking about, we had 50 recommendations or we've had, 20 recommendations, and yeah, great, absolutely. But what absolutely happens to those recommendations is the key to effective scrutiny. So really sort of asking the question about, okay, what have you done with our recommendations? Where are they? What happened to them? Yeah, the board said, great, we love them. Your senior management say they're fantastic, but where have they gone? What's happened to them? How do you know what's happened to them? Are you asking for reports back about implementation? Are you actually saying, well, maybe we could build this into the actual project plan for our scrutiny, where we say, after every quarter, we expect a report of what difference our recommendations are making, or have they been implemented? And then also reporting back to the tenant base as well, because a lot of the time scrutiny will have asked the questions of the wider tenant base about through surveys, maybe focus groups, maybe online stuff. So reporting back as well, because of you, tenants on this particular area, we found out this, we did the scrutiny and now this has changed. And reporting that back is absolutely critical to good scrutiny as well. So hopefully all of you today can, if you have been involved in scrutiny for a while, can point to something and say, yeah, if it wasn't for us, that wouldn't have changed. And when you do that, it's a great feeling, isn't it? It's an absolutely fantastic feeling to know that what you've volunteered in terms of all your hours, in terms of your dedication to this, has actually made a difference and changed stuff. And I think that for a lot of people is one of the big motivations as to why they get involved in scrutiny in the first place. So when it comes to what is scrutiny, scrutiny is about making a difference. It's about making that change. It's about tracking the change and being able to say to other people, we've made a difference. So in terms of the sort of more theoretical side of it. So I've talked really about the practical side of what is scrutiny. Scrutiny is absolutely about investigation. It's about challenging. It's about making a difference. And it's about seeing the bigger picture. But here at TPAS, we also talk about some principles as well when we talk about what is scrutiny. And I know that sounds a bit woolly, and I'm not even sure I'm allowed to say principles when I'm talking no nonsense, but I think I can, because I think what underpins it is absolutely critical. So if you look at all these boxes and you can give them a big tick and say, yeah, absolutely, I can show that that happens with our scrutiny, you are doing some cracking scrutiny. You absolutely are. So the first thing is around being independent. Okay, so what does this mean? And again, had a great discussion last night about what independence means. And people were talking about independence meaning setting their own sort of agendas for meetings. It was about choosing their own topic. It was about being able to get hold of the information that they wanted when they wanted it. It was about being able to interview staff when they needed to and have that support from staff. And it was that feeling really of not being sort of steered in a way, being able to sort of, be in charge of their own destiny, I think is what scrutiny is wanted. And that is something that sometimes it's not always easy to achieve. And we talked a bit last night about maybe that needs to be defined at the beginning. What is expected of staff when it comes to supporting scrutiny, and what is really the role of residents, tenants, customers. And that can really then start to define what independence looks like, and have that conversation. What does independence look like to us as a panel, and how do we make that work? So when it comes to what is scrutiny, scrutiny is absolutely independent. If it isn't, then it doesn't work. Scrutiny is inclusive, and I've talked about this already. Some great session yesterday from our friends at Positive About Inclusion, talking about how we can make it more inclusive and more diverse. So it has to be outward looking, it has to connect well, it has to see how it can really capture a wider involvement of the tenant base, because without that, again, it becomes isolated, it becomes this elite group that people are like, oh, you know, what do they do? Who are they? And that is not really where good scrutiny is going to come from. The third thing up there is about positivity. So this is again about, you know, the culture of the organisation. It's about how they see scrutiny. It's about encouraging it and supporting it, whether that's through training, through mentoring, whether it's through staff, you know, being trained and understanding what scrutiny is all about. So positivity is absolutely a key component of scrutiny. Again, if the culture's not right, you can put all the fancy things in the world into that particular organisation, but if the culture's not right, they'll just wither and die. It has to have the positive approach and the positive attitudes of staff within that organisation. You're a critical friend, and you have to be honest sometimes. You know, you might sort of have to say things that people don't want to hear, but you have to do that in a way that's constructive and supportive, you know, and there are, you know, ways and means of doing that. But being constructive is important, and being a critical friend sits nicely within that. And then finally, the purpose. I've talked about that already, that it makes a difference. So I hope that's really given you a bit of an insight into what scrutiny is. Be interesting to see whether some of the chat, I'm tempted to go to the chat, but I can't because I'll get sidetracked. So I'm going to keep going. So keep using the chat. I will come to it, but I'm not going to get distracted just yet. And that's a bit like scrutiny as well, isn't it? When we start out on doing our scrutiny, we've scoped it out well, and before we know it, we get distracted by all other things and we start sort of losing that focus. So I'm going to keep my focus. I'm going to move on to the next bit of the session. So how do you do scrutiny? Well, I've put there a picture of some licorice all sorts, because there's all kinds of ways of doing it. And at TPAS, we don't say, well, actually, you have to do it this way, or, you know, really, this is the best way to do it. We don't have that approach at TPAS at all, because we recognise that obviously organisations are very different. So if you're a housing association, maybe with 1,000 tenants, you're going to have a very different approach maybe to a council that's, you know, got 40,000 tenants. It's going to be very, very different for everyone, really, to sort of work out what is the best way of doing scrutiny. So with that in mind, these are a little bit outdated now, these stats, but I thought I'd share them with you anyway. This was from a survey that we did in 2019. And this really sort of given us some idea of what people were doing in terms of their mechanisms for tenant scrutiny. So by far, I guess the most popular for both TPAS and non-TPAS members was a dedicated scrutiny group. And a lot of it, you know, is really perhaps where you're at. You may be part of a dedicated scrutiny group as well. And they function really well. I think they're excellent. Again, they need to be mindful of being outward looking and not becoming too insular. But generally speaking, a dedicated scrutiny group, you know, some real good successes, as have all the different models in their own way as well. So we've got a dedicated scrutiny group, and then we've got some people, some organisations, sorry, who have got a permanent group that has other roles. So they may do a bit of scrutiny, but they may do other things as well. And that rings particularly true in the smaller organisations that perhaps, you know, can't be setting up different groups because they've only got, you know, so many residents maybe to draw on to do things. And I suspect the next one, the task and finish group, has grown in popularity, I think, since 2019. And I'll talk about that on the next slide as well. But certainly that seems to have become more popular. And also the next one, really, an online approach to scrutiny. Well, we've not had much of a choice, have we, really, in the last 18 months in terms of what we did with scrutiny. We've had to shift online. So again, it'll be interesting to see how that manifests itself after the pandemic and whether we see a more hybrid approach to scrutiny. And then there are some other odds and sods there around tenant inspectors doing different sort of roles around scrutiny and some other things as well. But I think the main message from that is that actually a dedicated scrutiny group is still the most popular way of doing scrutiny up and down the country. So let's talk a bit about what's happened in terms of trends and the rise of the task and finish group. So this tends to use a pool of scrutineers that are actually recruited, ready, if you like, as and when required, on standby, ready to do scrutiny. And the involvement is very project-based. So a review will be identified, and then the pool of scrutineers will be drawn on depending on what their preferences are or whether they want to take part. So it's not always the same people doing that scrutiny all the time. And I think that is interesting, isn't it? That again, it's making it a bit more inclusive, it's opening it up a little bit more. But then on the downside, I guess, you've got this situation where you have to keep that pool of scrutineers trained, you have to keep them interested. So again, there's a bit of, pros and cons to that, I guess. But it's a very focused activity. They create a report, they present it, and then the group closes. And it needs support, really. So it needs something to actually carry on monitoring that group and it needs something to actually act as a monitoring function as well. So once the scrutiny is done, who's going to monitor what happens to it? Where does that go? So it needs that thinking about in terms of linking up, and it needs absolutely structure and commitment from the organisation to make that happen as well, because it needs a lot of planning and a lot of organisation. But it is working, and again, we're hearing that there's been some really good projects undertaken as a result of task and finish. We're also seeing this as well, the scrutiny coordinating group. So this is the idea that you have a high-level tenants group who maybe do lots of other things, but one of their main roles is actually scrutiny coordination. So that's coordinating it, not doing it. So they will then choose and scope the topic, this group of residents who sit on this coordinating group, but they won't carry out the investigation. So you'll almost have like field workers who are part of other tenant groups or other volunteers who will go out and do the evidence gathering. So they will then look at doing maybe some surveys out and about, they maybe do the focus groups, maybe do the interviews, and then they fetch all that information back to the coordinating group, who collate the evidence, look at recommendations and track implementation. So again, I can see how this could work very well. You've got that, high level, sort of tenants group, customer group, residents group, who are looking at sort of performance data. They've got their fingers on the pulse when it comes to the organisation and what's happening, so they can really start to think about choosing a topic, but they haven't got the capacity or choose not to do the investigations because they pass that on to other tenants to do, and that joins up quite nicely. So again, we're seeing more of that coming through. So if that's some of the models for doing it, and again, I'm not saying any's better, or you should have this one, you should have that. Some have got boot camps as well that they run, and others, have different approaches as well. So there's lots to go at. As long as you've had that conversation with residents about what works best, and staff as well, the model that you come up with is entirely up to yourself. Okay, so let's look at the scrutiny process. Now, this is something that we've put together at TPAS. It's been around for a long time. We've had different sort of steps to scrutiny, how to make scrutiny successful. And the process itself can be implemented in a variety of scrutiny models. So I think it can work whatever model you actually take on board. And what I like about this is it's a real robust way of actually showing people and being open and transparent about how you actually do scrutiny. And it works. I'll be honest, it works. So doing it this way is a very sort of tried and tested method, if you like, of producing a good quality scrutiny review. So I'll just touch on these briefly because I've got some slides after this that will go into a bit more detail. So the first step is obviously identifying what to review. It's about scoping the review out and making sure that you're clear about what is actually in scope, what is the thing that you're actually going to be looking at, and what is the stuff that you're going to leave to one side. It's about having a project plan. Again, doesn't have to be a grand project plan at all. I'm a big fan of just writing down what is it we've got to do, who's going to do it, when's it going to be done by, and what help do we need or what support do we need. So planning your project out. I know lots of organisations have got online facilities or software to help with this as well. So you might want to use that. And then it's actually getting out there, isn't it? It's about thinking through and thinking, what investigations do we need to do? And that will be looking at the paperwork, so the documents. It's about understanding the topic. It's about making sure that you can actually look at what the standards are for that particular service that you're reviewing, understanding maybe what others are doing in the country around that particular service, and then going out and doing your investigations, talking to tenants, maybe having a survey, maybe doing a focus group, maybe observing what's going off, whether that's in a call centre or just really immersing yourself in that particular service and really knowing what it is you're looking for and trying to nail it down to some key line of inquiries. Then you make some evidence recommendations, and again, evidence is the key here. It's really difficult to get recommendations through if you've not got some robust evidence, and we'll talk about that. Report then and communicate what you found, and then track and review. So those are the sort of steps, if you like, that you can go through, or the stages that you can go through to do a review. When it comes to scoping and planning, I think it's always useful not to cast your net too wide. The number of scrutiny groups I've worked with that have said, okay, we're going to do repairs, and then you start breaking down what repairs actually means, and it's massive, isn't it? There's all kinds of stuff in there. What kind of repairs are we talking about? Is it the day-to-day repairs, or is it the stuff that's programmed in? Then it's about what part of the repair service are we going to be looking at? Is it the actual reporting? Is the actual doing? And all that kind of sort of stuff starts to come out, and I think that's good to actually look at that and then be very specific about what part of that service you're going to look at. Again, same with communication. People say, oh, we're going to scrutinise communication. Crikey, that is a tough one, because you've got to be very specific about what you're actually going to be looking at when it comes to communication. And planning for outcomes as well. What is it you're trying to change or improve with this particular review as well? You've obviously identified it as a topic to look at, but what is it that you're actually trying to get out of it? What's the end game? What you're trying to improve? Talks about project planning tools and actually keeping focused and don't give in to temptation. Again, I've mentioned that already, how easily sometimes it is to get distracted. So when we think about, looking at the actual topic itself, making sure that you've actually got it scoped out well is really important. And I think another bit of advice from us when it comes to doing scrutiny is actually make sure you understand the topic. So I know a lot of you get staff in to talk you through how it works. And I think that's a really good approach, isn't it? If you're going to be looking at the repairs service, and maybe it is about, why repairs are taking too long, get someone in to talk you through about how it works and give you some idea of the service standards that are part of that. And maybe, you want to approach some experts about it. Maybe that's something you want to have a look at. Particularly, I was talking to a group of residents in London, and they were talking about they wanted to scrutinise building safety, but clearly that's a massive area, and there's lots of different technical knowledge and expertise perhaps you need to know about to get that right. So they were going to approach some experts to bring them in to actually help them understand how they could do this review successfully with a bit of independent advice and expertise. And again, I thought that was a really good approach to that particular scrutiny. talk about researching all the documents, and that's what makes scrutiny great, isn't it? There'll be somebody on your team who loves looking at documents, who will be the one who wants to wade through the policies, the service standards, wants to look at all that stuff, and that is really key to good scrutiny as well. Don't underestimate the need to research stuff and get an understanding of what's going out. And I've talked as well about what are others doing. I mean, we're hoping to set up our National Scrutiny Club at the end of this week, and I think that'll be really helpful to facilitate that sharing of information across scrutiny, between scrutineers. So if you're doing a scrutiny on service charges, have others done that? What good practice is out there? So sharing that information and researching what others are doing can help you do good scrutiny, because it's hard when you've not got a benchmark of where other people are at and what good maybe looks like. So once you've got your topic and you're ready to go, it's about then, what we're going to be investigating here. What are the key issues that's coming out? What are the things that are really standing out to us that we maybe need to look at in a little bit more detail going forward? So this is my favourite bit of scrutiny. I'm not that person who's going to be looking at all those documents. For anybody who knows me, I'm not great at terms of focusing on lots of paperwork, but I love this idea of actually getting out and doing this reality checking. So the paperwork, the stats, all that stuff's told us something, but what's going off out there in the world? And this idea of doing the reality checking. So surveys, lots of tools out there to do surveys, whether that's SurveyMonkey or looking at, other methods. I still love a good face-to-face survey. I was with a group, it's a few years back now, and they persuaded their organisation to put a skip on some greenland outside the estate, and they had a survey going for their scrutiny, and they got such a great response. So every time somebody came out to dump a bit of rubbish, they said, have you got a few minutes while you're doing that to answer our survey? And they did, and it was a fantastic face-to-face, best response rate I've ever seen. It was well worth the investment in that skip. So thinking about surveys, how we do that, how we engage people effectively in answering our questions. Focus groups, again, focus groups, lots of good practice about running a focus group. I wouldn't be too concerned, about doing it online if you can, because again, you can bring people in who perhaps are not able to get to face-to-face stuff. So looking at running a small focus group. Interviewing, I love a bit of interviewing, when you've got staff in to come and talk to you, and maybe talking to operatives or maybe talking to the contractors as well, depending on what you're doing. Observation, again, really fascinating. I'm not sure it's as as prevalent as it used to be, observation, but I do remember people sat in the reception area just watching. They were looking at customer service and they were just watching receptions, how that functioned and what happened in there, and that was useful. Mystery shopping, I think that's an interesting way of doing some reality checking. We got told in one review that absolutely all our staff are trained on tenant engagement. They know what it is, even the call centre staff. So we got somebody to ring up. A couple of tenants rang up and said they were interested in getting involved and joining. Could you give us some advice or where we need to go? And it was surprising how many staff didn't really know what we were talking about. So again, mystery shopping can be helpful. Customer journey mapping. Oh, there's a phrase, isn't there? Customer journey mapping. Does that count as jargon? I think it probably might be corporate gobbledygook, I guess. But to me, that just means sitting down and just walking through what happens to a customer when they get a service and all the different points that they actually come into contact with the organisation. So if you can work out what the customer does to get a repair done, then you've done some customer journey mapping. And apologies to people who know that is actually much more complex and complicated. But for me, when it comes to reality checking for scrutiny, customer journey mapping is just following in the footsteps of yourselves as customers and what happens to you, and then thinking about the different points that you make contact. So lots of different reality checking methods out there. You may be able to add to them. I'm sure you might be able to. Okay, I'm just going to touch a little bit now on the next slide. When it comes to research, and I know as volunteers we want to get things right when it comes to scrutiny. So I do mention this because I think it's important when it comes to evidence gathering. And when you're doing scrutiny, you are doing research, you are gathering evidence, you are doing investigations. So I think it's worth mentioning that in research, people talk a lot about the triangulation of evidence. Again, sounds very complex, but basically it's just about making sure, if you can, you've got different sources of evidence to back up what you're saying. So on that little diagram there, you've got maybe some observations, some questionnaire responses, and some participant comments. And maybe all of them are telling you the same thing. They're all maybe identifying a problem with a particular aspect of the service. So it might be then that you can very reasonably say, we think we should have this recommendation. The reason we think that is because we've gathered this evidence and it's come from 3 different sources, because that really makes it incredibly robust. So it might be that you're doing a review on, I don't know, grounds maintenance. It may be that you've done a questionnaire. It may be that you've gone out and talked to people who are taking the service. It may be that you've observed them actually doing, the grass cutting or the grounds maintenance. And maybe that's telling you there's an issue or a problem with something. And then, as I've said, you've got some real strong evidence from all those 3 sources to put your recommendations forward. And it's very hard to argue then with it. And it also stops us from just making that gut reaction, if you like. Oh, we've heard this on this survey, then absolutely we need to get that changed. It may be that that's just an anomaly. It may be something that's just come up in one particular area or just with one particular group. So really try to get hold of that additional evidence can be very, very helpful. I think the next slide, I get asked this a lot. How do we choose a topic? How do you choose your scrutiny topic? Lots of ways of doing this, but again, the more you can get in the mix here, the better it is. So I've put there the STAR survey of tenants and residents. This is one that tends to be done by a lot of organisations where they survey a big percentage of their of tenants about certain aspects of the service. And again, it brings in some good data. Performance information, they will have lots of that key performance information. And we may get some national performance information if the regulator has their way and we end up with some national performance statistics. So that'll get thrown into the mix. Talked about benchmarking. I put Housemark in brackets. That's a club that landlords are members of, and they share lots of data and information from different organisations, and that can be a useful place to visit and ask your organisation if you can have access to that information. Complaints data, I think, is always interesting. And again, you're not asking for names and addresses of who complains, it's just a theme and the trends that are coming through. And then I've thrown this one in because, again, we talked about this yesterday. This is the idea that the tenant base itself can trigger a scrutiny review. So when scrutiny first came out, this was a big thing. People talked about this and it was going to really revolutionise how we did things. So this is the idea that if you get, say, 50 tenants who have registered or maybe petitioned that something is not right in that service, it will automatically trigger your residents to do a review. And again, you can see how that might have worked well, maybe, sort of potentially at Grenfell. A lot of residents were complaining. If that had triggered maybe a scrutiny review in some place or somewhere, maybe then things would have been investigated. So I think actually looking at this again is maybe something we all need to think about. Is there something we can build in where we give tenants, ordinary tenants going around, doing their sort of business like we all do, but we give them the opportunity to log somewhere or register somewhere that actually we'd like this to be looked at. And then when you hit a certain number, and that'll be for you to decide as an organisation, when you hit a certain number, it automatically triggers that scrutiny panel, group, whatever, or task and finish to carry out a review. And that really could be a strong way of connecting scrutiny back to the tenant base. So something to think about there. Also, maybe when you come to choosing a topic, community groups and tenants associations, I think are a vast, undertapped, if you like, sort of bank of knowledge and information. They know what's going off on the street. They know the word on the street. They know, things that perhaps they're the eyes and ears. They know things that are coming in. So talking to them or getting some way of feeding that back as well. And again, you may give me some other ideas about how you choose a topic, and we can look at that in a little while too. So I'm nearly there in terms of my slides. I hope I'm keeping you with me, because I know I've been talking for quite a while, but not long to go now before we open it up for some questions. So I just wanted to talk a bit about report writing as well, because again, that's something I get asked about. Who writes the report? You know, has it got to be the tenants, the residents, the customers who write the report? If they don't write it, will that kind of interfere with their independence? And again, what I say, doesn't matter who writes the report, as long as the residents have agreed the content. So, you know, who's tapping away on the laptop, or who's putting, you know, it together, making it look pretty, is really irrelevant, as long as the content is absolutely what the residents, tenants, customers wanted, and they sign it off when it's done. So I think that's important to recognise. And I also think it's important to think about the audience as well. And do we need to mix up our reports when it comes to scrutiny? Board reports are tremendously boring, generally. Nah, well, yeah, I'm going to be honest, I have not really read many interesting board reports. Again, another reason why nobody will ever have me on a board. I haven't got the concentration levels for it. But give me a short video about what you've done that I can just tune into for a couple of minutes. I'm all over that. I'm really happy to do that. So I'm not saying board reports are not important. They absolutely are. And you need to probably do one to make sure that you get your recommendations supported in the highest level and get them implemented. But you also need to think about other people as well, about people who perhaps haven't got the time to read a board report and not interested in reading it, but are interested in what you've been doing. So could you do really just a short video summarising it? So think about your audience. Do you need to mix it up a bit? Can you reach out to more people by just bearing it up a little bit and doing something different? So the content will vary, but I think there's some key things that people want to know. Why have you chose that topic? Where did that come from? What did you do? So how did you do your review? What did you find out? What your recommendations were, and what comes next? And I think as long as you're covering that sort of stuff, generally speaking, you will show that you've done a really robust and good review. And it may be, you can say, you know, if you want to look at all the research as well, you can find it here and a link to that potentially, because sometimes people do want to look at the detail and do want to look at the research. So when it comes to your reports, think about your audience. Make sure, you know, you actually maybe mix it up if you need to, but then have a look as well at covering the main points and getting those out there. Okay, top tips really about tracking impact. And I'm passionate about this because I just think all that work that goes into scrutiny, it's an absolute outrage if those recommendations that are agreed don't actually get implemented. So absolutely make sure you've got something in place that tracks this, and you know as a scrutiny panel that they've been implemented and are starting to make a difference. There's lots of different ways of doing this, and again, there'll be good practice out there that we can share with each other around this. But is it about really maybe tracking it through a database or a dashboard? So I've seen this used very effectively. You know, it's just a simple spreadsheet where the recommendations are sat and listed, and then there's an update done to it, and they're sort of kept an eye on by the scrutiny group. It may be that the business plans that the organisation produce have a space for scrutiny actions. So you can see quite clearly that once the board signs the recommendations off and the board goes, yeah, fantastic, we want to see this happen, they filter automatically into the business plan and the service plans for those particular organisations and for staff to go away and implement. So is there something there in the business planning that can make sure that those actions are actually taking place? Some groups appoint a scrutineer and a staff member to be the champions for that particular group. So they actually take it on themselves to monitor and report back, and that can work well. Or you just say to the organisation, we want an update on a quarterly basis, if that works for yourselves, about where you're at with these implementation, with these recommendations and how you're implementing them. So again, just getting something in place. And I think I don't know if Caritas is with us today, maybe, and forgive me for mentioning your Caritas if you are, but he was talking about how in their project plan now, they're looking at ensuring that they build in the actual monitoring and the tracking into that actual project plan, so it becomes part of what they do. So it's not something that's just left, it's actually integrated into their processes, which I think is excellent. And hopefully we can hear a bit more about how that works. So tracking your impact, making sure that you know absolutely what's happened to your recommendations and how they make a difference, and then tell everybody about it. You know, you're doing some cracking work, you know, never sort of cease to be amazed about the fantastic work of scrutineers up and down this country. So tell everybody about it, you know, shout from the rooftops, get something on your website, get something in your newsletters, tell TPAS about it. We're happy to shout about it as well, particularly, you know, during, not just during Scrutiny Week, particularly throughout the rest of the year as well. So tracking that and making sure you're telling people about it is absolutely essential, I think. Okay, you'll be pleased to know I've come to my final minutes now, and that's me done in terms of talking to you. So I want to then just stop sharing my screen now and start opening it up really to questions. I'm not sure how I'm going to manage the questions because there is a big group. So I'm going to get the chat up first, and I'm going to see if there are any questions there, and then if people want to put their hands up, we'll try and manage that as we go through, and hopefully we can get to everybody. Oh, so there's lots of nice comments coming up, thank you. So Sandy's talking about Scrutiny Is able to have the boardroom look at, yeah, without being I think we talked about this, Sandy, didn't we, about, you know, how scrutiny allows you to be a bit more free, that once you become a tenant board member, that kind of loses itself, doesn't it? So I think you've got a great position as a scrutiny panel member to actually be very proactive and actually have something, you know, that you can have that freedom, if you like. Groupthink, yeah, definitely. So lots of good comments coming in. Barbara saying that they go to the cabinet members of housing to sign stuff off. I like that, go straight to the top. Yeah, that's great to see that relationship, definitely. David's saying that their panel gets updates on every quarter on action plans. Yeah, really good to see. What if no scope for running any scrutiny? Yeah, I mean, if your landlord isn't doing any scrutiny, in theory, they are contravening the tenant involvement and empowerment standard, because it does say there that they provide the opportunity to do scrutiny. So I would definitely ask how they meet in that and get them to look at that as well. And don't forget now that the regulator's been a lot more proactive in terms of the consumer standards, or will be a lot more proactive. And they have actually found organisations to be failing in relation to the tenant involvement and empowerment standards. So I don't think it's something to be took lightly. So I would definitely go back and ask what's going off there. Would a scrutiny coordinating group be achievable at a smaller level? Absolutely, I think that could work really well, and it probably does lend itself to quite small organisations, to be fair. So you could have a core group who are actually doing the coordinating, and then just recruiting others or commissioning other tenants to do the work out there in the field as well. But what I would say about that scrutiny coordinating group, it needs to be bang on. It needs to really function very, very well. So it's got to have a good sort of diverse group of people who are outwardly looking, who are able to sort of connect well with other residents as well. So it's got to really be a great little group to make that happen. Project planning tools, yeah, I mean, people use Yammer, don't they? And what's the other one? And Teams seems to be taking over the world now, doesn't it, in terms of project planning? So you've got Yammer, and what did they call that one we used, Lisa, that nobody used? I can't remember. We had we had one that that nobody used. We set it all up and it was like, yeah, we're going to put all our projects on here, we're going to put everything we're going to do, and then nobody used it. So
I know what you mean. I can't remember the name.
See, it was that good we can't remember what it's called. I think if you're going to invest in project planning tools, make sure people are going to use them, and they don't become an industry in themselves. So again, just a very simple document can do the job. You know, just make sure it's something that everybody's going to buy into and use. Don't invest in some fancy project planning thing if nobody's ever going to use it. Just get something that does the job and it's simple to actually do. Okay, what else have we got? How will we're looking at the HRA account in different areas? I'm not sure. Barbara, I don't know if you want to give me a bit more. I'm not quite sure what that question is, I'm afraid. Barbara Rickards. Don't know if you want to come in, Barbara?
Yes, we're going to scrutinise the housing revenue account, and of course a lot of it is personal details and stuff like that. How will it if we want to benchmark it against other organisations?
Okay, when you say you're scrutinising the housing revenue account, do you mean what it's been spent on to make sure there's no leakage?
Well, what it's been spent on and how much it's split up into different areas, because it's not just for our housing, you know, it goes towards maintenance and stuff like that. So it's a very big project. There wasn't so keen on us doing it, but we found out, you know, we don't say money siphoned off, but it's not used as good as it should be.
I think that's a big concern for a lot of council tenants, actually. I know I talk to, you know, they say, well, you know, our rent money is supposed to go to the HRA account, housing revenue account is supposed to be ring fenced, but we know it's been siphoned off or leaked in other places. So I think it's a great topic that you're reviewing. Fantastic. Hats off to you for doing that. And again, I think there'll be some other organisations, some other councils, tenant scrutineers who maybe want to have some conversations with you, Barbara, about that. So do join the National Scrutiny Club when we set it up, and let's get talking about that, because I think it's a really good one to scrutinise. Hull might be a good group for you to have a chat with. If they don't mind me putting them on the spot. Oh, Eden quite likes boring reports. You see, Eden, I need Eden in my team, definitely. Likes boring reports and goes through them with a fine-tooth comb. Love it, yeah. And that's what you need in scrutiny, different bits of that jigsaw coming together. Okay, as a scrutineer, where do you go for legal advice? It's an interesting one. I would always, you know, sort of ask well, I'm not going to ask the question, why do you want legal advice? But I guess if you do need legal advice, the solicitors is the place to go. But obviously that's going to come with the cost. I don't know if it's legal advice about, I suppose, you know, all right, Kath, don't tell me if you don't want to, but I'm going to ask you, what do you mean legal advice for what? Kath Newell, does she want to come in?
Yeah, this happened a few years ago. It was over service charges and that, and I know the organisation had theirs. They were able to go to their solicitor and ask, but I kind of felt it's a bit about how much authority you actually have in the end if you come to a bit of a dead end. And where do you go for that advice? Because, you know, we're volunteers, and as you say, going to a solicitor, it costs. So it's really just that. Where do you go when you've explored all avenues within the organisation? Where do you go after that?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, ideally, you know, I have seen organisations that have paid for independent legal advice for the scrutiny team and paid for that person to come in and do that. You know, that's something that could happen. But actually, there are people, you know, the housing world's well connected, and there's lots of people out there who are willing to do stuff for free or maybe give a bit of advice for free. So again, it's worth maybe putting it out there if you're on any of the social media stuff, or just asking for advice that way. But in an ideal world, if you need independent legal advice, you know, we would be saying to the organisation, could they help with that? But it's a tricky one, I grant you, not an easy one to sort of nail. Yeah, somebody else may have some top tips on that better, perhaps.
Thanks anyway.
Okay, no worries. Geraldine's talking about mystery shopping. Yes, mystery shopping, wanting to know about whether other people are doing that, and we'll try and connect people up after this so you can have a chat with others. Housemark, yeah. Get access to it. I don't see any reason why your landlord wouldn't give you access to it. You know, I do know a lot of organisations that do offer this facility to their scrutineers, and rightly so. Yes, Slack, somebody's mentioned Slack. That's another project planning thing, isn't it? Team kind of thing going off. Yeah, I don't think that's the one we had, Lisa, was it? No, I can't believe we can't remember that. Don't tell Jenny, will you? Okay. So yeah, local authority, how many members are sufficient on a group? Again, I get asked this, you know, what's the ideal number? And it's really difficult to kind of give you an answer, really, because it depends what their role is, what they're doing, also how the actual group itself set up. So if you've got a coordinating group, it can be quite small because they can get others to help with the scrutiny. But if it's a small group and they're trying to do the desktop, they're trying to do the reality checking, they're trying to do the report writing, they're going to burn out pretty quick. So it's about getting that role right for a small organisation and being creative about how that might work in terms of drawing other people into it. So I think it's really a tough one to give you an answer to, but think about their role and think about trying to involve other residents in it if you can. So Oliver's talking about an area of the business, repairs plan. Yes. Isn't it hard to get people, and is there any repairs people on here? It's hard to get repairs. The asset management crew, oh my word, sometimes they are very, very tricky to get on board with scrutiny. I think things are changing. I think the message is getting through, but it is hard, Oliver, you're right, sometimes to get buy-in from these people. And I think the only way that will happen is if the culture of the organisation from the top down makes it a priority. And it may be that it's included in some of their performance appraisals, you know, about how they've actually contributed to scrutiny. It may be that, again, it's just some training that they need, but absolutely they need to be on board with this and stop seeing it as some like optional extra that, you know, is just about sitting down and having tea and biscuits. Tenant engagement is good business practice, and if they don't know that, then I would be incredibly worried. So Oliver, get on their cases and get them sorted, definitely. Okay, so is there any reason why tenants shouldn't set up their own scrutiny group and present themselves to the local authority? I think there is, yes. I think that tenants and staff need to work together. I'm a big fan of bringing two sides together to work together on things, because ultimately things will only happen if you come together. If you set up your own scrutiny group and say, here we are, you need to deal with us, they'll be like, well, you know, actually that's not how we want to work. We want to work in terms of setting it up together, to looking at joint governance arrangements, to looking at how it will work with the cabinet members. So there's all kinds of things to consider. I would not do that if you can help it. Trello, that was it. Was that it? That was it, wasn't it, Lisa? Well done.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well done. Yeah, Edward's got a question. Yeah, over to you, Edward.
Hello. Morning, everyone. And hi, Louise. And thanks for a great session. I found it really useful. It's really just a question about individual roles within a scrutiny panel. Does it need a chair? Does it need any other specific roles? And what would their responsibilities be?
Yeah, again, I've seen various sort of different ways of approaching this. Some have just said, well, actually, we're non-hierarchical in terms of we're not having any officer positions, if you like. And what we're going to do is just appoint a facilitator for each review, and that will change as we do a different review. So maybe it's someone who feels particularly interested or passionate about, say, repairs. So they will be the facilitator and the organizer. So they call them organizers, facilitators, and that'll change once the topic comes around again. Or I've seen, again, chairs work really well, and you know, they appoint a vice chair. That's the only two real sort of officer functions I've seen, maybe a chair and a vice chair. And again, I think it's what that word chair and vice chair brings with it. And within the group dynamics, it's about managing that, I think, because sometimes the idea of being a chair translates to some people as being the all-powerful, all-seeing eye, and what I say goes kind of thing. So I think it's about managing that role description and what that means. But you do need somebody, I think, to coordinate things and facilitate things in terms of that group. I think every group needs a leader, doesn't it, in some ways? And I think that is a good position to maybe get filled. But I think maybe chair and vice chair is a bit overkill. Maybe, I don't know, possibly. I hope that's helped, Edward.
It has, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions from the audience? Are you an audience? I don't know. From the group of people. All this YouTube is going to my head now, isn't it? I think thinking I've got an audience. Who do I think I am? Okay. So any questions? Any hands up? Have we got, Lisa? Can you see anybody with hands up?
Can't see any hands up. There's a couple more questions now in the chat. Oh yeah, Sandy.
Yeah, Sandy. Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to say was when you're talking about, or when people talk about project management software and things like that, project tools that you're using to scope out, and that is that a lot of that sometimes is taken on by staff, and they forget that they're using software and systems that most tenants do not have on their machines. So then they forward through the information, and you can get this scoped out thing that ends up being about 5 pages of A4 in size that you can hardly read because they forget you do not have that software. So that's just one point to make.
And I think that's a really good point, Sandy, that, you know, we've got to be mindful when we work in organisations that the volunteers are not part of our systems, of our necessary, you know, our approaches to things. That, you know, we've got to be mindful of that. And one, I think it was the other day, somebody said, we have a WhatsApp group and that's our project planning tool and that works well for us. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. If that's what, and I think somebody's put in the chat as well, it's up to the group, you know, to come up with something that works for them, not what the organisation thinks should work, but
Yes.
what works for them. So I think being clear about that, and you're right, you know, nobody wants to, you know, what do they call it? Prince 2 project management, you know, sort of qualification to be able to understand what's going off, do they? So absolutely, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's just head back to the chat. Kate makes a good point about, can having a chair and a vice chair act as a barrier to inclusion and diversity? Possibly, yeah. And again, it's about what does that role bring with it? You know, what are the connotations? What are people's understanding about chair and vice chair? You get some brilliant chairs and vice chairs who promote inclusion and diversity, but it's about, you know, whether that is actually the right, I guess, approach for a group who have to work as a team. You know, it's almost like you need, as I said, you need a captain, you need a team leader, but whether you need those words chair and vice chair, I don't know. And I think somebody again has said it's up to the group maybe to have a look at that and come up with the answer, and I would totally agree with that. Would you expect the chair or the vice chair of a scrutiny style group to be the tenant board members as well? No, I wouldn't expect them to be the tenant board members as well. Absolutely not. I think liaising, having good connections with tenant board members is absolutely crucial, but actually having a tenant board member on your scrutiny panel doesn't sit right with me, if I'm quite honest. I think it just brings up all kinds of conflicts of interest and all kinds of issues. So no, that's not for me. And again, I think groups of scrutineers will tell you that as well. So Frank's saying theirs has a recorder or a controller. I quite like, yeah, controller. That's interesting, isn't it? I won't mess with the controller, definitely not. Sounds really, really good. But again, you know, if that works for the group. Also, a support role as part of the scrutiny group, depending on the results that you might need. Yeah, that's interesting, Michaela. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and tell us a bit about what you mean by a support role. Is that the staff support role?
That's Michaela here. Now, not wanting to go back to what you've just said, Prince 2 terminology, which probably a support role is part of. So let's separate ourselves from that. That's about what results you want from the meeting. So it's that piece which is how we record in the elements that people need to understand from the meeting, to which parties that they need to go to as well. So it could be just something as simplistic as, you know, bullet points, anything like that, that are the physical results from the meeting as well, that you're going to, you know, potentially take forward, and your coordinating people would manage to take forward as well.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, Michaela, raises a good point about role responsibilities and being clear about who does what when it comes to scrutiny, because some scrutiny groups will absolutely want to do their own minutes, will want to do their own agendas. Some will not. They'll want that support from their staff members to do that. So I think, again, being clear at the outset about expectations and about role, and having a defined role. What is the staff's role when it comes to scrutiny? What are the scrutineers' roles when it comes to scrutiny? And then agreeing that will help you avoid a load of stress further down the line, because the tenants will be thinking, oi, why are you doing that? You're compromising our independence. And, you know, the staff member may be sat there thinking, well, actually, I think you should be doing that. So get that sorted, you know, really take time to iron that out, I think is a really good way forward.
And there's just a level there to make sure that the outputs are taken forward as well, because otherwise we've all sat in meetings where they're, no disrespect, they're pretty pointless, and you wonder if there's anything that's actually been taken from the meeting. It's just that bit which is making sure that, you know, there are the outputs and they can be taken forward in the right way.
Absolutely, and that's about the outcomes should be the recommendations, isn't it? And tracking those going forward, and again, having a process for doing that so everybody's clear about what happens is really good governance when it comes to scrutiny. Okay, I'm going to bring Darren in. Darren's got his hand up. Over to yourself, Darren.
Yeah, we have a chair and vice chair on scrutiny, and as I'm the chair on the scrutiny, we have a meeting with member of staff to go through agenda for our next meeting, and then when we're in the group having a meeting, we all go through that and we make the decisions on what reviews we're looking at. And another thing, and I've seen it in other scrutiny, is let everybody speak and have their say as well on the panel.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there, Darren, about, you know, being a chair or vice chair, and there's some fabulous ones, as I'm sure yourself is, and it's about how that chair operates, isn't it, and that vice chair and how they do business. And I think they can be a real asset. I'm certainly not anti-chair or anti-vice chair. I think there are some really good examples of that working effectively.
And what we do when we've done a review and stuff, then it goes to the Ops Committee, and they invite us to join on the board on the Ops Committee for their decisions. Right,
excellent. Okay, brilliant, thanks for that, Darren. Just gonna, before I bring Barbara in to ask a question, I'm just gonna take a couple more comments from the chat. So David's saying a good chair is, absolutely, one that gives people a chance to air their views and then maybe looks at doing the voting. And then we're talking a bit about independent mentors. I think it's an interesting one, this, and I think it can be really helpful. I think having an independent mentor or support person can really bring that independence to the actual scrutiny function. I know there'll be a cost for that, and that's something to consider. But again, I think it can be worthwhile. And I know a couple of people have put in here about being a mentor. Where did you source a mentor? I've got to say TPAS, haven't I? You know, come to us, we do it really well. No, there's lots of other organisations that do it as well. But with that is one of the things that we offer, a mentoring service for scrutiny. So that's something to think about. But, you know, there's a cost implication, obviously, for that. Okay, so Barbara, do you want to come in next?
Yes, I put it about independent. It's always nice to have an independent, whether there's a cost or not, because they can remind you what documents you might need to look at, not what the council are going to produce, something from the outside the box, you know, something we might not have thought of. So they give us a good line. I'd always say go for somebody independent outside the council, not somebody in the council, because you can be very much led by the council.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good advice. And I'm, you know, you're probably thinking, well, she would say that, but I have been a scrutiny mentor, you know, for probably 6 or 7 different scrutiny groups. And I think what I found quite worrying at times was the things that they were being given that actually weren't really that helpful in terms of, trying to put this tactfully, aren't I? You know, maybe they weren't really giving them the full information that they needed. And I'm not saying they did that on purpose, but I think at least as an independent mentor, if you've got an awareness about stuff, you can bring other things in, and you know what's going off in the bigger picture as well, which can be helpful. So I think that's a good point, that, Barbara. I think it can be helpful to have that as well. Brilliant. Talking a bit about training now. Yeah, people saying train staff and tenants together. I totally agree. I think that's a really good approach, particularly when it comes to scrutiny. If your staff and tenants are getting the same message about where it's come from, why it matters, why it's important, how it's done, then they're hopefully going to be on board with what you're trying to do going forward. And it does foster that we're working together on this. Good scrutiny is about working together. The worst scrutiny is when it becomes confrontational, when it becomes us and them. It's very difficult to make scrutiny productive when you get to that stage. Okay, I think we're coming sort of the last 10 minutes. Christine's asking about covering costs. Yeah, I mean, it does have to come from the, you know, the organisation. So it would be tenants' rent money effectively that would have to cover the costs for scrutiny. But having said that, I think what they get back out of scrutiny is tremendous. You know, some of the, and again, I don't know if there's anybody from Hull here, they'll tell you about the money that scrutiny has saved the organisation, because they've looked at value for money when they do their scrutiny, and it saved the organisation, you know, X amount of money. And I know other organisations have done the same as well. So investing in your scrutiny is like investing in good consultants. You know, they will go and they will look and they will do the investigating, they will do the scrutiny, and they'll do it effectively, and they'll bring something to it that a bunch of consultants, you know, with their fancy cars and their, you know, sort of swish holidays maybe can't do, because they don't take the service 24/7 like you do. So I think there's definitely something in it in terms of investing in your scrutiny panel, because they absolutely deserve that investment for some of the stuff that they will bring to the business. So that's what I think. I'll get off my soapbox now. And I didn't really say that about consultants. Don't tell Jill and Emma, will you, Lisa, who are our consultancy team. They don't drive posh cars, though, I don't think, anyway. Okay, so what else have we got? Any more questions? Yeah, Sandy's sort of saying about the amount of hours that scrutiny has put in. Yeah, and put it in their annual reports. And I think that's a really important point about the social impact of scrutiny as well, the social value that scrutiny brings. You know, so actually it's volunteers' hours. And I know on one of the sessions before, a couple of people talking about how people have joined scrutiny panels and it's developed their CV, it's developed their employability opportunities, they've had free training. And again, it's a great way of attracting younger people as well, by saying, if you become a scrutiny volunteer, then you will get, you know, X, Y, and Z, and a chance, you know, to develop further, and all that social value as well that it can bring in terms of self-esteem, well-being. You know, being part of a group is always something that generally has a lot of positive aspects to it. Okay, I think that's probably it in the chat then. Has anybody got any more questions that they want to ask from today's session? Any more for any more? Nope, don't think so. That's good, I think. Okay, so just to flag up a couple of things that are coming up in terms of the sessions today. So we're carrying on Scrutiny Week, as you can imagine, for the rest of the week, as you would do. So this afternoon, we have got our Scrutiny Beyond Housing. So we've invited people from different parts of the world in terms of health, policing and local government to talk about how they do scrutiny. So do check into that. And then we've actually got on Thursday a couple more sessions. We're hearing from our friends in Wales, and we're actually doing digital scrutiny, and we've got some scrutiny top tips as well. And then we're wrapping up on Friday with yourselves doing some scrutiny showcasing about what the good stuff is that you've been doing, and giving people a chance to show that off. And then we wrap up at 2 o'clock. But Lisa, are we able to announce our special guest that we've got?
Oh yeah, definitely go for it.
Yeah, well, we've just been told, I've just had the message that Jackie Weaver, nonetheless, is going to be doing a feature for Scrutiny Week and TPAS. So how tremendous is that? I'm just like bowled over. This woman did the Brit introduction, and she's doing something 20 minutes of Ask Jackie, and she's got questions to answer that Ray's put to her from our comms team. So That is fresh off the press. Ray will kill me for telling people, but I can keep it to myself. So Jackie Weaver, if you're a fan, she is going to be doing a slot for us on Friday to round off. I know it is magic, isn't it? I'm dead excited. She's got a book out apparently, so I think she's just here to plug the book, but I don't care. That's fine. That's fine. So do look out for that on Friday, and hopefully that should be a really, really good session as well. Okay, folks, just to say thank you. It's been a pleasure as always. Look out for the stuff that's coming up. Everything that we've got is going to be on the YouTube channel or in our resource hub and stuff. So look out for that. And thanks again. Yay, bring on Jackie Weaver. Absolutely, Edward. Yeah, get your tickets and your popcorn ready for that. Love it. Okay. Look after yourselves, folks. It's been a pleasure as always. Take care, and hopefully we'll see you back for Scrutiny Week this afternoon, maybe next week, this week even. Okay. Cheers, everybody. Take care. Thanks.